Psychedelics Today. I'm your host, Joe Moore. Today on the show, we have Dr. Vilmarie Narloch, PsyD, and she actually works for students for sensible drug policy. I'm going to read you her bio here. She's the drug education manager at SSDP, Students for Sensible Drug Policy. In this role, Vilmarie oversees the development and implementation of the SSDP Peer Education Program, which is a training program for SSDP members to become certified to deliver SSDP's drug education program. Just say no to their peers. Vilmarie is passionate about reforming drug education in the U.S. and abroad and has dedicated years of study on the topic for her dissertation. Vilmarie has taken on this position because as an organization driven by students with exceptional knowledge on drug policy and other drug use related issues, SSDP is uniquely positioned and qualified to be developing a drug education program. Additionally, Vilmarie educates staff and the network on the current state of research and treatment issues with regard to substance use disorders and mental health. Vilmarie aims to aid in the connection of policy and practice by helping our network understand the impact of policy on the access to treatment and care while utilizing the latest research. Vilmarie earned her master's in counseling and psychological services from St. Mary's University of Minnesota and a PsyD in clinical psychology during her recent time at Roosevelt. She was a graduate student, a research assistant with Roosevelt University, Illinois' Consortium on Drug Policy. Her work at ICDP included research support, report co-authorship, and event planning and coordination. Vilmarie's interests in drug education, access to treatment, and harm reduction policy and her practice have led her to numerous projects, including the provision of counseling and harm reduction services to students at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and DePaul University, serving as a member of the Chicago Consortium on College Alcohol Harm Reduction, a pre-doctoral internship in the Adult Behavioral Services Department in a local public health department, and a postdoctoral fellowship in a small private agency where she provided therapy for individuals, couples, families, and groups in addition to supervising interns. Additionally, Vilmarie has been an adjunct instructor teaching undergraduate and graduate courses in psychology and substance use disorder treatment. She has dedicated her studies and clinical work to advanced harm reduction as the standard of practice for substance use disorders. In doing so, she has sought opportunities to educate others in her field about harm reduction, including her students. Vilmarie's dissertation titled "What Youth Want: Developing a Drug Education Curriculum Based on Youth Guidance and Evidence-Based Principles" inspired her to continue to advocate for effective drug education on a professional level, which led to her current position at SSDP. Additionally, Vilmarie's next personal career goal is to become trained to deliver psychedelic psychotherapy, which she considers to be the future of psychological practice. It's quite a mouthful. It's really cool that Vilmarie took the time to talk to us, and this is our first contact on the show with somebody from SSDP, which we're really happy about. And we couldn't really have asked for a more informed person on the show. So we get into all sorts of stuff here, from harm reduction to kind of examples about this Just Say No program that she's developed with SSDP and how that works. And we get into some other interesting stuff about particular harm reduction projects Vilmarie's worked on and how certain things have played out in her area, Chicago zone. And yeah, it was a really fun interview with Vilmarie. And she even contributed to our Navigating Psychedelics class, lessons on self-care and integration, as a masterclass teacher, giving us kind of tactical advice on how to do harm reduction from SSDP's perspective. SSDP does work with students, so they hear a lot of stuff and they are able to develop programs and education around that. So yeah, check out Just Say No, KNOW, not NO. Obviously the DARE program didn't work, or I wouldn't be here. So thanks again for listening. Let us know what you think of the show. Feel free to hit us up and give us some feedback SSDP has a pretty strong presence all over social media, so you can check them out on Facebook, Twitter, wherever. And I believe there's regular events around the country, U.S. I don't know about internationally, but they do a conference that is pretty highly regarded. Some people from the Boulder Psychedelic Club went to one, I think, 6 or 8 months ago in the Northwest, and they had a great time there, learned a lot. I really want to interview some of those people about the conference to see how they liked it, what they learned, what it's like to be a member of a local SSDP chapter, to reduce harm, educate themselves and others, all that kind of stuff. So that's actually what we're trying to do in our class too, but giving a little bit more direction around and context around psychedelics, because they're such a weird class of drugs that are very powerful, probably the most powerful psychiatric drug humans have ever come across. So yeah, we really owe it to ourselves to get appropriately educated on this stuff when we're going to do it. So check out our class. Links are on the psychedelicstoday.com site, or you can check out our page on psychedelicstoday.teachable.com. If you want to contact us, hit us up at psychedelicstoday@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, maybe Pinterest. Let us know if you want to hear from particular authors or any people producing YouTube videos or anything like that, or want to hear us give a breakdown on particular drugs or something. Just hit us up, let us know what you want, and we'll try to make it happen. We would also love reviews on Facebook, on our Facebook page, or on iTunes. Either would be lovely. Thanks again. Take care.
Welcome back to Psychedelics Today with your hosts Kyle and Joe. Today we are here with Dr. Vilmarie Narloch, the Drug Education Manager at SSDP, the Students for Sensible Drug Policy. And Vilmarie is a clinical psychologist. Welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
Yeah. Yeah, so do we want to jump in a little bit about your background and how you got involved with SSDP, and also maybe a little bit about your educational background?
Yeah, sure. So I actually didn't find out about SSDP until I was in my doctoral program. So I came to Chicago to start my doctorate at Roosevelt University, and I knew that while I was there, I wanted to do some sort of assistantship somewhere. When I was interviewing, I was telling one of the professors about what my interests were with drugs and substance use treatment, and particularly with young people. And he sort of remembered, he's like, yeah, hey, I think there's this person here at this school that's doing some research on that here in Illinois. And it turned out he was referring to Kathy Kane-Willis and the Illinois Consortium on Drug Policy. So I met with her, and once I started school at Roosevelt, she brought me in, and I got to be a research assistant with them for my time at Roosevelt. And it just so happened that Kathy was the advisor for the Roosevelt chapter of Students for Sensible Drug Policy. So she was sort of like, well, you're going to work for me anyway. You might as well go to these meetings and, see if it's interesting to you. So I went to a meeting, and I didn't stop going to the meetings. So I really just enjoyed everything that SSDP stood for. And it ended up being a really good balance for me to be working on the clinical side of things and learning about that a little bit more, and then being able to sort of be active on the policy side of things and sort of changing some of the not so great things that I was facing in my clinical work. So it kind of helped me have that outlet a little bit.
Awesome. Can you describe a little bit about what the SSDP is? We get a lot of questions about maybe how to get involved in the psychedelic world or drug policy world. And, it seems like there's chapters all over the United States at many colleges. So it's, probably be a really good resource for students.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to be involved in psychedelic research or any sort of psychedelic work and you're a student, getting involved with SSDP is the first step for sure. So many of our students are interested in psychedelics and are able to then have access to a lot of the fine folks doing really great work in this area. So, we work closely with MAPS as well. So it's just a great connection to have. But in general, Students for Sensible Drug Policy, it's a grassroots organization made up entirely of students. We have, I think, over 300 chapters in now 26 countries all over the world, which is just incredible to me. And yeah, the overarching goal of SSDP is to end the war on drugs. And we do that in a lot of different ways. The cool thing is each chapter kind of has a little bit of autonomy to figure out what they're into and work on those issues. So if you're into cannabis reform, you can get support in doing that work. If you're into psychedelics, you can get support in researching that or getting into that. In my sort of experience, I was really into harm reduction. So I did a lot around harm reduction and sort of focusing on that as far as clinical work is concerned. So I was able to sort of meld my things together there. And so, for example, my chapter, we did a lot of education. So really similar to what the Just Say No program looks like. We were doing a little bit of that at Roosevelt while I was there. And because I was working at the Consortium on Drug Policy, we were doing a lot of work around heroin use. So a lot of work on harm reduction with heroin. We worked on the Good Samaritan law in Illinois and things like Naloxone access in Illinois. So it was really cool to be involved in these really, really important efforts. And that's happening all over the world with SSDP.
It's so awesome, so powerful to create this network of now educated, empowered, active people working towards drug safety and decriminalization, or just killing this drug war thing. That's so nasty. Do you have a particular reason or any kind of particular push with this drug war thing? Why is it important to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, for me, as a psychologist, on the clinical side of things, it's things like access to good treatment for, people who use drugs and people with substance use disorders. It's things like utilizing evidence-based, harm reduction measures to save lives, and things like this. And, ultimately, also, when it comes to young people is, effective drug education. My dissertation was actually on drug education and what young people thought of their experiences. Not surprisingly, they didn't think very highly of the kind of education that they were getting. And so that was, kind of a goal for me too, is to do something different for young people so that they could learn about drugs and drug use in a way that was actually going to be useful to them.
So not like the DARE program trying to scare people.
Right.
Using poorly educated police officers to educate kids about drugs. All I remember was the PCP lessons from the cops that came in to teach me about it. And it's you can turn into the Hulk at any moment you want using PCP. I'm like, oh, great. Thanks, middle school. I think that was 5th grade. I'm like, what are you guys doing?
Right. Yeah, I think my favorite lesson was they brought in sort of this tackle box looking thing of different drug paraphernalia.
Yeah.
And your normal stuff that you might see, pipes and things and needles and syringes. And then there were sort of the I guess at that point in my life, stranger things. So hollowed out random items. I think my favorite was the Sharpie marker. Just thinking wow, people are really creative and resourceful when they're trying to use drugs. And that was my takeaway from that lesson.
That's fascinating. Kyle, did you get some DARE time?
I did.
Or was it over by the time you... Okay.
No, I did.
I never know. I know you guys are pretty young, but I didn't know when that switch happened.
Yeah, we had it from, I think, 5th grade all the way up to 8th grade. And they just pretty much said, you will go to jail if you use drugs. And then friends started smoking weed and they're like, hey, it's not as bad as they told us it was. Yeah. And then, it started leading to other things for some folks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. So your background is in harm reduction. I'm kind of curious. There's this... I guess what I'm trying to get at is the difference between educating versus not educating. And so, or harm reduction techniques. So for example, in Ohio, there's, a town that wants to do away with Narcan and, the cops are just nope, we don't want to do that anymore. It should be if those people do it like 2 or 3 times, they have the right to die. I don't know. What do you think about like a stance on that versus like saving somebody's life and with addiction and whatnot?
I don't think you'd be surprised to hear that. I think that is ridiculous. This whole like 3 strikes kind of idea, and just the fact that like anyone can say that anyone doesn't have a right to live is just like I can't. It's completely inhumane. I mean, I think everyone has a right to a decent life, and if that means they need to use Narcan a few times to get to a point maybe where they can get treatment that they want at that point, or just live, and function in whatever way makes sense for them. Who are we to tell them how to live their life? So.
We just did this July 4th episode. I don't know if you caught it, where it was all about cognitive liberty, stuff like that. And it really kind of struck a similar chord. Like, who is anybody to tell another person what they can and can't do with their own body? And it's, really interesting. Yeah. And just the thought, the audacity that it's okay to put somebody in a cage for 30 years or whatever.
Or just
also,
let them die.
Yeah. Which I don't know which one's worse, but yeah, who knows? It's crazy.
Yeah.
That kind of thing is so nuts. So do you, like with your work with SSDP so far, you've done a bunch with SSDP for the last bit. When did you start with SSDP? Wow. That's great.
As a student,
what have been some wins with SSDP that you've been a part of that's kind of been really encouraging?
Yeah, so definitely the Good Samaritan medical amnesty law in Illinois and Naloxone access and things like this. Also on the campus level, I was able to create and push for a Good Samaritan policy on campus for students when I was there. And that took way longer than it should have, considering what it does. But so it was definitely tough, and it took a lot of patience. But those are some things that I'm really proud of as far as my involvement with SSDP.
Can you give a little more detail on this Good Samaritan rules or law?
Yeah. So in general, the Good Samaritan policy basically provides protections for someone who, if you're in a sort of medical emergency related to drug use, you can call for help, call 911, and be able to get help without fear of getting in trouble if you have drugs in your system or are in possession of something. And there are some limitations depending on where you are, and some of the laws are a little bit different, but generally that's what it is. And on campus, it's kind of the same thing, where you won't get kicked out of your dorm or won't lose scholarship and things like this if you're caught on campus with something and you have to call for help for whatever reason.
Yeah, that's great and hugely important. There in where I'm from, New Hampshire, there was this whole push right as I became 21 around internal possession laws around alcohol, and that was right around 2005-ish. So you could get arrested as an underage person for possessing alcohol internally, which is crazy. Wow. But it's still there. The live free or die state, this, supposed libertarian haven, it's kind of crazy. That's still happening. And it sounds like the Good Samaritan law is kind of a spin on trying to fix that.
Yeah. And it's, so I see it as far as on campus, it's kind of the answer to zero tolerance policies, for example.
Right.
Whereas, if in that situation, if you had to call for help, you may get kicked out, even though you're trying to have your friends not die or whatever. So it's kind of addressing those issues. And also the idea that the number one reason people don't call for help is fear of getting caught or fear of getting in trouble. And that leads to more sort of hidden use and more potential risk. Right.
That's great. Can you speak a little bit about the Just Say No campaign? Because it seems like there's a lot of energy going in there right now.
As far as our project at SSD.
Right.
Yeah. So the Just Say No peer education program started up a few years ago. My friend and fellow colleague, Francis Fu, and I had been talking for a while about doing something around education for SSDP. And we sort of came to the idea of putting together this curriculum in a sort of peer format. So, and the idea is based off of, a lot of students feel like they're pretty informed about drugs and drug use, but felt like they lacked some of the resources to be able to point people to when they ask them questions about, drugs or drug policy even. And so part of it was like, well, let's put together like a really strong resource for students, and like, let's make our students like the people that people are going to. They already were, but like now we can formalize this and provide them with the resources that they need. So that's sort of where it came from, and wanting to sort of have a basis for our students and chapter members being able to have open, honest conversations with their peers about drugs, drug use, and drug policy, and all of the intersections with those issues. So we created this curriculum, and it was student-based, so we had a lot of students helping us. That was like a really important thing for me, is to make sure that a significant amount of the resources and the ideas were coming from students. So we have that. And then we did also have sort of like a working group of experts in the field who helped us sort of find the resources and kind of give us some feedback on what was going to be most effective. So, and that's sort of how things started, is kind of having these conversations with students and with these experts, and putting together the curriculum. And so it's sort of a two-tiered thing. So it's the training curriculum that our students go through, and that's 12 different lessons on like anything you would ever want to know about drugs, drug policy, harm reduction, stigma. And then the other piece is the Just Say No lessons, and that's sort of the drug harm reduction education lessons that once our students are trained, they can sort of deliver that to their peers on their campus. That's kind of what it works. Yeah.
That's great.
And where do students get trained for that? Is there a specific location, or do you go around to schools presenting this and doing trainings?
So the way it exists right now for this initial first year sort of pilot, it's all in a Google document with links to all of the resources. So it's a kind of a self-study, independent study format where they read through the resources, and then for each lesson, there are a set of questions that they have to respond to and provide us with feedback. And so that's how I know that they've completed a lesson, and then they can sort of go forward to the next one once I check that out. So that's the way it's been for this year. And a lot of the feedback that I've gotten is that it's a lot of information. It's a lot to go through. So one of the things I'm doing is condensing the lessons into like webinars, so that I can present those. They can live on YouTube, or I can go to a chapter and present, a couple of them at once, and they can kind of get that way. So we're kind of changing it up a little bit. We'll still have the documents, the Google Doc with all the links to all the resources, so they can always have access to that. It'll just be a little bit more efficient for them.
Great. Yeah, if you go to ssdp.org/justsayno, there's tons of great material on there. I'm on there right now. It's like you have slides for alcohol, caffeine, cannabis, cocaine, DMT, ketamine, LSD, MDMA, nicotine, pretty much like everything.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was going through some of the PowerPoints, and yeah, it's really great information and awesome resource too. It's really great that you guys put this together for the community and the students. And
yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's great. I've certainly learned a lot myself. I mean, I'll have students that'll send me a resource, and it's just like, I didn't know this thing, so I've learned a lot too, and that's been like really cool. You can also get to the training curriculum from that website as well. So if anyone's interested in checking that out, they can. But yeah.
Cool. What's the overall goal, do you think, this particular program?
Yeah, the overall goal is really harm reduction, and ensuring that if young people are going to use drugs, which we know they do, that they can do so safely with some sort of background knowledge and understanding of what these drugs could potentially do, and how to get the most out of the experience if they're going to.
Mm. Great. Yeah. Can you give us an example of, say, like a harm reduction technique? Like, what do you guys have in there for harm reduction?
Yeah, there's so much. So with each lesson, with each of those modules, we go through there's different components. So there's things like prevalence rates for use of that particular substance. There's things like the effects of the drug, including therapeutic and potential negative effects, and any potential harm that could be associated with that drug, how to identify and respond to an emergency with that particular drug, and then sort of general harm reduction principles. We talk about drug set and setting in each of these lessons as it applies to that drug. So things like knowing what you're taking, understanding what the dose could be or should be for you. We talk a little bit about drug checking in there too for those that it's most relevant. We also go through the history and the origin of the drug, just because I'm kind of a big nerd and I find that stuff really interesting, so I threw that in there. And we talk about even notable figures, so important people in history that have been associated with those drugs. And there's also how it works in the body, and we also go into the legal aspect of it. So what policies are for the drug, and any sort of additional resources that one might go to. And the way that it's set up is they're sort of in a template format. So there's certain slides or certain sections that can be filled in by whoever is delivering the module to be more tailored to their community. So there's a section where they can put in any information that they might know about the prevalence of use on their campus of that drug. And then in the policy section, whatever their local policies or laws are around that drug.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you've run into this at all, but Joe and I are putting together this navigating psychedelics course and integration, and we want to go over some harm reduction techniques and whatnot with it. And I was just having a conversation with somebody, and it just kind of came up about providing instructions on how to do drugs versus just providing harm reduction. Mm-hmm. And so what is the difference there? Is there any? But, if you're presenting these harm reduction things, it's an argument is well, you're just giving them instructions on how to do this stuff. And it's is that, I don't know, have you ever run across that before? People kind of with a negative comment about that? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely something we consider. I mean, SSDP in general, we always say we don't condemn or condone drug use, right? So it's definitely more harm reduction focused. And we try to keep it as developmentally appropriate as possible. So, for example, I'm going to be going to Denver this week and sort of doing a tailored down version of this for a local high school. And so, we might not have all of those components in the high school version. We just have to sort of think about our audience, right, and think about who we're talking to, because there are some harms that are different for younger people than for someone who's a little bit older. But I think if you're an adult, and you want to know how to use a drug, I think it would be useful to have that resource so that you are going to be doing something in a way that's going to be less harmful. For example, a lot of syringe exchange or needle exchange programs will offer things like how to find a vein and how to, good vein care to make sure that you're injecting in a way that's going to prevent you from getting infections or abscesses and things like this. So, so I do think that it, to some degree, showing people how to use a drug if they've made that choice is harm reduction.
Mm-hmm. I had this conversation during the Oakland conference with some people about, there's needle drugs and then there's, other stuff that's maybe slightly less harmful. For instance, nitrous oxide, like how could you reduce the number of brain cells killed, for instance? Like, that people are going to keep doing nitrous. There's no way around that. So like, is there a way to reduce that? And I think there is. I still want to dig into that a little bit, but yeah, there is explicitly a harm reduction aspect to it, and I totally agree with you, Vilmarie. Kyle and I have been debating that last couple of weeks, like how do we handle that? And is there a legal gray area? Yeah, probably, but to help people, we have to play in that legal gray area, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all kind of are in that space, and anyone who's in drug policy reform or talking about drugs for your job, you're, definitely playing in that area.
There was a case, I've brought it up on the show a few times. There's a case in my county here in Colorado where a person was charged with manslaughter by the district attorney for advising somebody on how to smoke a fentanyl patch after the person had asked.
I heard you talking about this. Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, it made me so upset that, a single text message, even though it was qualified with, you could die.
Yeah.
Be very careful. Like still, it's like suicide is suicide. Like it was kind of like he was asking for it. Really. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah. And in Illinois, we've had this issue with drug-induced homicide laws sort of superseding the Good Samaritan law. So if someone, for example, is using heroin with a friend, as people are, common to do, and the person overdoses and dies, the friend could be charged with drug-induced homicide. Because they maybe just happened to be the one to purchase the heroin that day. Like it was their day so yeah, that's definitely an issue that is, yeah.
Is that a number that's climbing? Drug-induced homicide charges?
I haven't looked at it recently. I know that it's been there's been a big push. There was a case in Illinois recently where it was a woman and her partner, and I think he passed away, and she was being charged with drug-induced homicide. And I think eventually it, she was able to get that fixed, and so she was no longer being charged with drug-induced homicide. But that was a big sort of case that we were all watching very closely to see, what direction this was going to go. Because I do think in certain areas in Illinois that has been the push, is to try to crack down on the heroin issue by criminalizing it more.
Ugh.
There was a weird case in my town years ago. I don't know what ever came of it or if the person got charged, but I guess a kid ended up committing suicide after they don't really know, but they found a bowl of weed and they said that there was some residue of PCP on there. And so they were going to find the person that sold them the weed and charge them for homicide for lacing marijuana with PCP or something like that. And I don't know whatever happened to it, but yeah, just you guys talking about that reminded me that, yeah, that's a thing.
Yeah.
It's like there's definitely room there for reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
I would hope the court would, the jury would push that one out.
Yeah.
But holy moly, it's scary. So what else has been going on with SSDP? Are there other projects coming up or that you're working on that are exciting or you want to talk about?
Sure. I mean, well, we do have we're starting to plan for our conference next March. It'll be the beginning of March in Baltimore. So we're really excited about that and to be in Baltimore for our conference. I mean, there's always interesting stuff going on. We'll be at DPA at the Reform Conference in October, and there'll be a lot of SSD peers on panels. I'm organizing a panel on harm reduction on campus. So there'll be a few SSD peers on there with me, and I'll be moderating that. And just, every SSD peer has something going on in their own communities too. Sometimes it doesn't even reach me, but there's some really cool stuff going on. And I think if you're interested in SSDP, even if you're not a student, you could always check out a meeting or get in touch with your local chapter to see what they're working on and support them any way you can.
Mm-hmm. Being connected to the colleges and SSDP, somebody from, I think, USA Today reached out to us about drug use and trends among college kids. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to do some research to figure out, are there any statistics on the rise of drug use or anything like that? Do you know, have you seen any trends or a rise in drug use on campuses among college age kids?
Just in doing like the work for the Just Say No modules, I use the Monitoring the Future survey data and the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. So those are the two sort of big data sets that I use for like our prevalence slides. From what I can see, from what I can remember at this moment, it seems that there's kind of like a a plateau. There hasn't been much significant rise in drug use among like college age students that I can tell. But yeah, so I think, but it's still definitely a concern. I get emails from college folks, college administrators, and I'm also part of this like health promotion listserv. And it's always a question about like what other program could we be doing and about drugs and alcohol. And so there's definitely a push for more services and more resources for students on campus, which I think is good. Even if the numbers haven't risen necessarily, like it still happens. Mm-hmm. Young people are still, are still at risk if they don't know what they're doing. So it's important that they have those resources.
The realm, has there been any concern among like SSDP or anywhere in the policy world with the whole thing with like Jeff Sessions wanting to crack down and start the DARE program back up and stuff like that?
I mean, we definitely talk about it. We definitely are keeping our eyes on what's happening. And, when it comes down to it, we sign on to letters against, things that seem unreasonable and not sensible with regard to drug policy. So like recently there was they were trying to sort of revamp the Analogs Act and give Sessions a little bit more power in that regard. So naturally we were against that. So anytime something's coming down the pike, we are very keeping close tabs on what's going on. And the great thing about SSDP is we have so many students that are like ready to go, ready to be active. If we've got a big thing to push for.
Mm-hmm. Power in numbers. That's awesome.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this whole thing, I think it was Dr. Carl Hart mentioned it, this move of just becoming a little more open about use when you're comfortable or if you're in a position to be able to do that. There's a lot of people that can't, but when you can, it's a really powerful move to be more open. And I'm in this funny situation, right, where if my employer found out psychedelics today might become a little more bare bones, but I think we'll be okay. But at least on here, I can be a little more open, and Kyle, being in graduate school, has to be a little careful due to licensure issues. And I don't know, Kyle, are you still running into issues with that?
I mean, it was just that weird bump up with like trying to interview for practicum, and because I also put on my resume that I was volunteering for MAPS and that I'd been part of some of the MDMA training, and so they're looking at me like, what are you doing? And it was at a college, very kind of conservative, and they were like, we don't really know how this is going to fly when we show it to like our psychiatrists and the higher ups. And I was like, oh God, did I just like, commit some professional suicide here by saying that I'm associated with, MAPS and this and that. But they were actually really cool about it. And they, the person interviewing me was like, personally, I think psychedelics are the future of medicine, but, we're also kind of dealing with a very conservative system. And, I'm just kind of worried that they might look at this funny. So, I mean, that was one example that I ran into where I was like, oh, man, like, do I hide this stuff? Do I not talk about it? Do I not put it on my resume? And they were really thankful that I did because they're like, that's why we wanted to interview you. Like, we've never seen anything like this before. I mean, like, where I was interviewing because, in my town, it's not, I was walking around with like my volunteer shirt from Psychedelic Science, like, oh, God, what kind of comments am I going to get? But yeah. I don't know. Sometimes I do get nervous with that of like, I don't know, like, am I kind of committing some, I know that it's like a benefit because if we do push towards legalization of MDMA, it's going to be like, the forefront. But yeah, it's like you're kind of like walking on like eggshells a little bit where you're like, this is coming up and this is probably the future, but also not a lot of people are accepting of it as well.
Yeah, I hear that for sure. I had a lot of interesting interview conversations like that too while I was going for practicum and internship and stuff like this, where people would, when it came down to that question, once they were kind of going through and like, what is SSDP? And so it's like having to be prepared to answer that in a way that is going to be appropriate for that setting, wherever it is you are. But yeah, I mean, I think that's something that our students ask about too a lot is like, should I put this on my resume? And, it kind of depends on what you're trying to do in your work and what your career is going to be if you need to be a little bit more careful about that. We actually do have a lesson in the training curriculum for the Just Say No program all about sort of self-disclosure and sort of like finding that balance. So because it's such an important thing that comes up so often with our folks that it's important for us to have the discussion and support students. It's hard to.
Yeah. What type of tips or advice do you have in that? Yeah.
I mean, a lot of it is sort of thinking about it for yourself and where you're wanting to go. And also thinking about like, if someone's asking you like, oh, do you use this drug or have you used drugs? Being mindful of like, why are they asking? What could this disclosure, lead to? Kind of thinking about where you are, who you're with, and that kind of thing, and who you're talking to, and just kind of protecting yourself. And in a lot of ways, like self-disclosure, like you said, Joe, can really help push some things forward and get sort of more understanding and decreasing the stigma. But for a lot of people, especially people of color and minorities who are in a more tricky situation when it comes to drug use, thinking, you'll have to consider that.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for that. Yeah. I think it's really important for anybody getting involved to know how to navigate this because it's such a gray area. It's like, what do you do? How do you present yourself? And like some of the like interview things that I've put out, I'm like, oh, I wonder if they just never got back to me because I had that on my resume, They looked at that and they're like, nope, we don't want to have anything to do with that. So,
and when it comes down to it, it's kind of like, okay, I don't really want to have anything to do with you.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but that's fine.
Yeah, and it's like, why would I want to work for anybody that doesn't accept that? And if I do hide it, I mean, we live in the age of and nothing's really private anymore. You just do a Google search and things are going to come up, It's like I could hide it off that for a little bit, but, if they decided to kind of just search a little bit, not too far away.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's so complicated. Yesterday at this DMT event in Boulder, there was actually a registered nurse that's going to be a nurse practitioner soon. Said, how do I get involved? I was like, well, my advice at that moment was actually post on these different psychedelic club groups online. Say, hey, I'm an RN. I would love to be involved.
Yeah.
What can I do? And then also just email MAPS. And, if you're an NP, you're a very valuable asset, just like psychiatrists and, PsyDs, like very valuable assets to the psychedelic and harm reduction movement. And, you will be recruited. Your efforts will be needed.
Yeah, I actually had an NP reach out to me not too long ago because she wanted to be involved and like help in some way. She had seen our the Just Say No program and like wanted to see if we could use any sort of medical expertise. And it was like, yeah, absolutely. So she's been helping me with some of the materials, and we're coming up with this sort of like quick harm reduction guide for like emergencies related to drugs. So taking from our Just Say No modules and sort of condensing it into a quick guide in consideration of like medical concerns and stuff. So that was super cool. And I was very, very grateful to her for reaching out for that.
Have you taken any training on administering naloxone?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What is that like? We haven't really talked about that on the show.
Yeah, it's actually pretty simple. I mean, in the moment, obviously, it would be a little bit more complicated, but generally, the way that we do trainings here, through like the Chicago Recovery Alliance or Midwest Harm Reduction Institute, it's you learn all about like overdose response, so how to identify an overdose and all the steps that should be taken, and then what you need to know to administer naloxone. The naloxone now comes in so many different forms. There's like the intranasal spray. There's the sort of self-injector thing that just sort of like, it's like a little robot thing that tells you what to do, and you just like stick it in someone's leg and it's all done for you. Those are very expensive, however. So generally, we're still working with sort of the bare bones, vials and syringe situation where we've got the kits. I think I have one here somewhere, but so usually we put together a kit, and it comes with a couple of syringes, a couple of doses. Oftentimes it'll have a little card that walks you through the steps. So if you're in the moment and you can't remember everything you got to do, you've got the resource right there. And generally what happens, you fill the syringe or the needle with the dose that you need. Stick it in someone's leg or butt and inject, and that usually should help them, it'll stop the overdose, essentially. And it does put people in withdrawal, so it's not necessarily a comfortable situation, not a pleasant situation, but they are alive, and that's the
right
part. Nowadays, with the sort of increased potency of heroin and the fentanyl that we're seeing, it's taking a lot more naloxone to reverse an overdose. So that's something to keep in mind. Is always have more than one dose on hand in case that needs to happen, in case you need to administer it more than once for that. So yeah, I mean, it's really simple, I think, and it's for what it does, the fact that you're saving a life, it's a pretty simple thing to do. And really everyone should be trained to do it because it's so easy. And it's pretty easy to identify if someone's overdosing, blue lips and cold and clammy skin, not breathing, that kind of thing are pretty easy to notice. So, yeah.
I just had a really interesting conversation with Mitch Gomez from Dance Safe the other day, and he had all this like inside politics information about like the fentanyl flows through the different drugs, and it was very fascinating to see that it was kind of like regionally specific. Don't throw caution to the wind on that, listeners, but you know, it is very focused in some zones like Toronto, or he mentioned that fentanyl was even being found on some acid blotter paper. It was marked fentanyl, like Dr. Death or something. So, be aware that it's on paper too. And it's out there, and New York City is like obviously a hotbed, and that whole East Coast. So like there is a way. Like, I wish it was more visible. Like, somehow we had like weekly updated infographics, like reports, so that people could be a little more up to speed. But I'm really excited about these fentanyl test strips that they've made available in the last couple weeks.
Yeah, super interesting. I don't know if you guys had a chance to read the study that Insight did using strips. I don't know if it's the same strips, but yeah, they did a study that just came out in May, I think, using, their participants that go into Insight and giving them the opportunity to test for fentanyl. And I guess it was something like 80% of what folks were bringing in had fentanyl in it. And they also sort of asked, like, knowing that there's fentanyl in it, is that going to change your use? And there were some interesting sort of outcomes there where some people were like, no. And other people were like, well, maybe I'll use a little bit less, or I'll, do some harm reduction around my dose or stuff like that. So
yeah, it's tough, right? Because you never know the dose. It's just, yes, it tests positive. Is it like 3 micrograms or is it like 5 milligrams in there, which is scarier? And, as an opiate user, like if you're a regular injector, you might be more tolerant and it would maybe not kill you at 2 milligrams, but maybe it would definitely kill me at 2 milligrams. Yeah, and I guess I've talked about it on a show, but I've used fentanyl in surgeries. I've had multiple surgeries, and I got it 3 times, I believe. Yeah. So probably no tolerance at this point, but a few months ago I did. So it's always interesting. Like, it's demonized, but it's like this really awesome medical thing that helps anesthesiologists quite a bit. I think there's huge cost savings for medicine, which I wish I paid less for my surgeries, but
sure. Yeah, I think one thing that you said earlier about, like, I wish we had some good data around this stuff. Well, like, the reason we don't is because of prohibition. Like, right? Like, we can't really research anything effectively because of that. We can't get this data because people are hiding it, because no one's going to report this openly. So we can't.
We got to rely on emergency room data that's publicly reported, which is awful.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Or coroner data. We've used that too in research for like overdose research.
I think it was just last week that the guy who produced those Hangover movies, so like this famous producer, just OD'd on cocaine and fentanyl mixed in Manhattan. So it like kind of shows that there is that kind of crux, like, I don't know, bleeding over, maybe accidentally or otherwise, of fentanyl into cocaine, and it's going to hit these wealthy folks, which maybe will scare them into getting some test stuff and hopefully helping support some of these organizations like SSDP, DPA, like all these groups that are doing work in a positive direction. I could only hope that's what will happen. Maybe they'll ask why. Wait, why was that dude doing fentanyl? There's no really good reason for a super wealthy guy to be snorting fentanyl. Like, if he's looking for that, there's a lot safer ways to do it. Right.
I mean, and yeah, that was sort of the trend with heroin use. Once it started reaching the suburbs and young people in the suburbs that were more affluent, there was a bit of a push for resources and life-saving measures that didn't really exist before, when our communities of color were being ravaged in the same way by heroin. So it's a little messed up that's what it has to take, for us to be able to get services to the people that need it most. But yeah, I mean, it takes the dude from the Hangover movies to get some money into the hands of the people who are doing this work. Then I'm not going to say no to that.
Yeah, the hope is that it scared his friends, and his friends now throw millions at these groups to do the work they're doing. Hopefully end prohibition and have this nice regulated safe market where people know what's happening. It's insane. Disclosure. I'll disclose something. Okay. So this past weekend, we, had some fun with some MDMA, and nobody had a hangover the next day. Nobody. And what does that do to? It's due to like clean sourcing and not going through, 18 hops down the drug ownership chain. And what is that? And it's ridiculous. And it's all because of prohibition. So these people that are regular users of MDMA and always get hung over, like, what's going on? Like, what are you doing? It's probably not just MDMA. There's probably a ton of amphetamine and caffeine, whatever else. Yeah. Often I think they mix in, strange, cheap chemicals, and it's all this prohibition stuff. And I hope college students are kind of getting that message in SSDP.
Yeah, we definitely are. I mean, there's a lot of interest in drug checking, making sure that what you're getting is what you're hoping to be getting. To the best of our abilities with the resources that we have in these test kits. But yeah, it's definitely something that our members and definitely their peers are really wanting to be sure that they're not getting crap and that what they're using is going to be safer.
So tied into universities, this is actually a new thought I just had right now. So with test kits, like reagent test kits like Dance Safe Cells, there's this, you get a result like, yes, it tests positive for MDMA, or yes, it tests positive for bath salts that you don't want to consume, but it doesn't mean there's other adulterants that don't go undetected. So being part of a university setting, I would wonder if SSDP could somehow lobby for an anonymous testing service through the groups that own the mass spectrometers, like chemistry teams. Yeah. Like, there's probably some overnight work that students could get some mass spec time on and get some job experience. Yeah. Have you ever heard any clubs thinking about something like that?
I don't think they as far as I have heard, I don't think we've heard of anyone that's going the mass spectrometer route. But I know that we have had some chapters and some students that, at least individually, like on their own time, they have purchased their own reagent kits and have been, helping their friends out by they've got. There are some that are doing it a little bit more formally. They have like a text hotline or whatever. There's another chapter that has a spot on campus where they store the kits so people can go and sort of borrow them. So there's a few different ways that it may be happening, but that's on their, as it is right now, that's on their own time. It hasn't been an SSDP activity. Right. Per se. It's like something that they recognized a need for among their friends, and we're doing that. So, it's definitely another one of those legal gray areas, right? And certainly I can't think of any school that would openly allow that, because there's the Drug-Free Schools Act that they get funding, and if they are condoning drug use in any way, they will not get that. So from an administrative standpoint, that would make sense. So some of the stuff that, that we do, that students do, even just talking to students about drugs, some schools, some more conservative schools have a problem with that. So it can get a little tricky for some of our chapters, but they do what they can with what they got.
That's tough. Drug-Free School Act. Was that Ronald Reagan?
Yeah, I think so.
Great. It looks like 86. I just pulled it up. That's tough. But that's an interesting thing. I'm going to start talking to some student groups about that. Like, how could they pool resources to maybe set up some sort of agreement with third-party labs to do that kind of thing. I know there's groups like Energy Control that do mass spec, but it's not cheap. No. And how do we democratize the access to that, make it cheap, make it available, and super increase safety? I think test kits plus these fentanyl strips, if done right, like if safety is going to go through the roof.
Yeah.
We're like my observational opinion is that, you know, there's too much drug harm happening right now, but you know, if you look at the numbers, it's really, it's unfortunate, but it's not that catastrophic. It's not like arrest numbers. It's not like car accident deaths. It's still super low. Like even alcohol related hospitalization is still like way less than that. It seems like to me, if you're looking at college campuses, not necessarily people on the street. So you have to kind of like separate the populations a little bit. Like homeless injectors are obviously far more at risk than a college kid. Right. Especially a privileged college kid.
Right. Exactly.
So you do have to look at that. But it just seems like the risks, like the recent EDC festival in Vegas, electric, what is it called? Daisy Carnival or something. It's like a really big EDM festival. There is only a single drug-related death, and it was really because he overheated. The headlines, even on your EDM.com, misappropriately titled it like MDMA overdose. I'm like, come on, guys, get it together. Your EDM. I've yelled at them a couple times on this. Like, it is not an overdose. It's he overheated because he didn't have water or enough shade. Like, get it together, guys. What are you doing? I don't understand what those guys are doing. So anything else you want to throw out before we kind of wrap up this segment?
No, I guess just a reminder, if there are students listening and you aren't already involved in SSDP, check out your school, see if they have a chapter. If not, you can start one, and you can go to ssdp.org to do that. It's pretty simple. And, you know, anyone has access to the Just Say No resources. It's out there on our website for everyone to see. So you can definitely check that out. And I'm happy to touch base with folks if they have questions. You can email me and stuff. So,
Dr. Vilmarie Narloch, thanks again for joining us, and we really appreciate your time in the show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks again for tuning in, everybody. Really appreciate you checking us out again. Please do let us know what you think. We really, really do want to know what you want to hear about in the show. As much as we're doing this show for ourselves, we're really doing it for you. We really want to make it as impactful to your drug life as we can. You know, if you're a researcher, you want to talk about certain papers, you know, hit us up. Maybe let us check out the article or paper, and maybe we can do some analysis and commentary on it for you, or we could find some experts to help us. We would really like to just make sure we're delivering as much awesome stuff to you as we can, and as awesome as possible, not just marginally awesome. I'm really curious about what you want to know about breathwork. We've talked about breathwork a lot on the show. Obviously, Stan Groff helped develop a really great model, holotropic breathwork, that is what Kyle and I were loosely trained in. Not really loosely. We explicitly did holotropic breathwork with our teachers, Lenny and Elizabeth Gibson in Vermont. And that's, you know, what I was really into for a very long time. And we kind of are doing our own thing now, calling it transpersonal breathwork, which is the Groff breathwork model, and totally informed, and just about everything's the same. I can't really think of anything different other than that with our training, we got a lot of philosophical education that I think is really helpful for understanding what's going on in those states. So yeah, I really want to know what you think about it. If you're curious about it, it's just not available, let us know. Maybe we can help you find something near you that would be good. There's holotropic breathwork people all over the world. We heard there's some folks in Germany doing, they're not calling it holotropic, they're calling it transpersonal breathwork also. So maybe check them out too, depending on where you're at. We are interested in traveling, doing some sort of international workshops and national workshops. For right now, I think we're looking at, this is the first you'll hear of this, a 3-day workshop in December in the Denver area. So we'll try to make it really close to the airport. If people want to come in from out of town, we can make that work for you without having to get a rental car probably. So let us know if you're into that. It'd probably be a week or two before Christmas time, just because I know people aren't doing anything that week of Christmas. I don't know why. I usually work. Anyway, that's that for the announcements on real world stuff. And internet stuff, there's, again, our class. I hope you're not sick of me talking about it yet, but Navigating Psychedelics, Lessons on Integration and Self-Care. Really want you to take care of yourself if you're using psychedelics or other drugs. And we want to give you some tools to be safer and to perhaps optimize the experience, because drugs are often done suboptimally. And it's really tricky because it's very rare people are doing single drug use. Often people are drinking beer, drinking liquor, also doing acid, smoking weed, maybe 1 or 2 Xanaxes, mixing up Adderall or whatever kind of speed they have. And you never know. You want to be careful with that kind of stuff and just try to follow some best practices. And we talk about a lot of that in the show because, it's not necessarily possible for everybody to, have a single drug experience every time they're out doing drugs. And we talk about that, how to handle that situation. Is it okay to smoke weed while you're on acid? Little secret. Yeah, it's fine. In fact, it might help quite a bit. Really check us out. And we have a lot of great reviews on our website. We had Leah Friedman come on the phone with us recently, and she gave us some feedback on the class. And she's actually a mental health professional doing a lot of really great work with folks in Massachusetts and with the Boston Entheogenic Network. Check her episode out if you haven't heard it. But she gave us this as a review. The Integration and Self-Care course provided high quality and individually tailored information for anyone from the seasoned psychedelic enthusiast to the curious but uninformed newbie. The perspectives offered are useful, unbiased, empirically validated, and generalizable to a wide variety of instances. I would recommend this course to anyone who is considering altered states as a means for personal growth or who seeks to integrate past experiences for their own betterment and for the greatest benefit of society. The course helped me add a few new tools and tricks to my arsenal and expanded my perspectives on conscious self-exploration. That's Leah Friedman, again, co-founder of the Boston Entheogenic Network. We also had a therapist from San Francisco give us a great review. This is Jessica Katzman, PsyD. This is a wonderful, thorough survey of psychedelic integration and self-care. As a mental health professional, there was so much value in this course for me that I can utilize both personally for my own growth as well as to help make use of their psychedelic experiences. Additionally, Joe and Kyle are a delight to listen to and quite knowledgeable and responsive to listeners' questions. Useful format as well. Yeah, we tried to really format the class so that it's easy to navigate on this teachable platform and make sure it's not too confusing, and stage it out well so that it's not introducing crazy concepts right away. We're kind of building up to more and more complex subjects and thoughts. And this is from our friend Diego from Australia. Hi, Diego. Thanks for listening and thanks for this review. Diego says, when I first saw the course, I was skeptical because there's so much information on the internet about psychedelics that can be misleading. I watched the first video and I knew right away that you guys knew what you were talking about, borrowing a lot from Groff and that sort of literature. I knew right away it was good stuff. The course was definitely worth doing. So if you have questions, feel free to ask. psychedelics@email@gmail.com. If all that wasn't enough, just so you know, we're donating 5% of profits to maps.org. So you are also contributing to psychedelic science when you buy this class. Again, it's psychedelicstoday.teachable.com, and you can find the class there. It will be launched on August 8th, and everything will be up and ready. You could buy now, or you can buy then. That's probably your best way to support the show and make sure we can keep doing it and bring you more and more content. We have a grand vision, but it will take support to get there. So, check out that class. Maybe if you can't afford it, maybe just shoot us an email to psychedelicstoday@gmail.com, and maybe we can work something out. Anyway, thanks for checking us out again, and really looking forward to bringing you another show soon. See you on the other side. Bye.